The morning sun was cold and gray when Officer Sarah Martinez started her patrol shift. She had been a police officer for 8 years, and she knew every street in downtown like the back of her hand. Sarah drove slowly through the busy streets, watching people hurry to work with coffee cups in their hands and phones pressed to their ears. It was Tuesday, and the city was waking up. Shop owners were opening their doors, and the smell of fresh bread came from the bakery on Main Street. Sarah loved this time of day when everything felt new and full of hope. She had no idea that this morning would change everything she thought she knew about her job. At 7:30 in the morning, her radio crackled to life. The voice was tired and frustrated. "Unit 47, we have a complaint at Chen's Electronics on 5th Street. Store owner says there's a vagrant sleeping in his doorway again. This is the 3rd call this week." Sarah picked up her radio and spoke into it. "Unit 47 here. I'm 5 minutes away. I'll handle it." She had dealt with Mr. Chen before. He was a good man who worked hard to keep his small electronics shop running, but he was also worried about his business. He said that homeless people sleeping in his doorway scared away his customers. Sarah understood both sides of the problem. The homeless people needed somewhere to sleep, but Mr. Chen needed to make money to feed his family. Sarah parked her patrol car across the street from Chen's Electronics. She could see a man lying in the doorway, curled up like he was trying to make himself as small as possible. He had long, dark hair that looked like it had not been washed in weeks. His clothes were dirty and torn, and she could see holes in his shoes even from across the street. The man was holding something close to his chest. As Sarah got closer, she could see it was an old military backpack. It was green and brown, the kind that soldiers carry. The backpack looked like it had been through a lot. There were patches sewn on it, and the fabric was worn thin in some places. Sarah walked slowly toward the man. She had learned over the years that sudden movements could scare homeless people. Many of them had mental health problems or had been hurt by other people. She always tried to be gentle, even when she had to move them along. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah said in a soft voice. "You can't sleep here. The store owner needs you to move." The man did not respond. His eyes were closed, but Sarah could see that he was not sleeping peacefully. His face was twisted with worry, and he was making small sounds like he was having a bad dream. His hands gripped the backpack tighter and his body shook even though the morning was not that cold. Sarah tried again, a little louder this time. "Sir, I need you to wake up. You have to move from this doorway." This time the man's eyes snapped open. They were brown and full of fear. He looked around quickly like he did not know where he was. His breathing was fast and shallow, and sweat covered his face even though the air was cool. "Where am I?" the man asked, his voice rough and confused. "What time is it? Did I miss the patrol?" Sarah was puzzled by his words. What patrol was he talking about? She knelt down so she would be at his eye level. "Sir, you're in downtown Phoenix in front of Chen's Electronics. It's Tuesday morning about 7:30. I'm Officer Martinez with the Phoenix Police Department." The man stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the buildings around him, like he was seeing them for the first time. His confusion was clear on his face. "Phoenix," he repeated slowly. "But we were on patrol in Kandahar. Where is my unit? Where are my men?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Kandahar was in Afghanistan. This man was talking like he thought he was still in the war. She had heard about this before. Soldiers who came back from war but whose minds were still fighting battles from long ago. "Sir, what's your name?" Sarah asked gently. "Rodriguez," the man said automatically. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez, 3rd Infantry Division." Then his face changed as reality seemed to hit him. "No, wait. I'm not in the army anymore. They sent me home." Thomas looked down at his dirty clothes and the doorway where he had been sleeping. Shame filled his eyes and his shoulders dropped. "I remember now. I'm homeless. I live on the streets." Sarah's heart went out to him. Here was a man who had served his country, and now he was sleeping in doorways and confused about where he was. But she also had a job to do. Mr. Chen was probably watching from inside his shop, waiting for her to move Thomas along. "Thomas, I understand this is hard, but you can't sleep here," Sarah said. "The store owner has called several times this week. Do you have somewhere else you can go?" Thomas tried to stand up, but his legs were shaky. He grabbed the wall to steady himself. "I don't know," he said. "Sometimes I sleep at the park. Sometimes under the bridge. It doesn't matter much." As he stood, Sarah noticed more things about him. His clothes might be dirty, but they were worn in a way that showed he tried to take care of them. His boots, though old and cracked, were tied properly. Even his hair, though unwashed, was pulled back neatly. This was a man who still had pride even though life had been cruel to him. "How long have you been living on the streets?" Sarah asked. "I don't know exactly," Thomas said, rubbing his forehead like he had a headache. "Time gets mixed up sometimes. Maybe 6 months. Maybe longer. Since I lost my apartment." Behind them, the door to Chen's electronics opened. Mr. Chen stepped out wearing his usual worried expression. He was a small man with kind eyes, but Sarah could see the stress on his face. "Officer Martinez, thank you for coming so quickly," Mr. Chen said. "I feel bad about calling, but my customers are afraid to come in when people are sleeping here." Sarah looked between Mr. Chen and Thomas. Both men had real problems, and both deserved understanding. But the law was clear. Thomas could not sleep in front of private businesses. "I understand, Mr. Chen," Sarah said. "We'll take care of this." Thomas started to pick up his few belongings. Besides the military backpack, he had a thin blanket that looked like it came from a hospital and a plastic bag with what looked like a few pieces of clothing inside. Everything he owned in the world fit in his arms. "I'm sorry for the trouble," Thomas said to Mr. Chen. "I didn't mean to hurt your business." Mr. Chen's expression softened a little. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I just have to think about my family too." Sarah watched this exchange and felt the weight of the situation. Here were two good people caught in a bad situation that neither of them had created. Thomas had served his country and come home to find himself with nowhere to live. Mr. Chen was working hard to support his family and keep his business alive. As Thomas gathered his things, Sarah noticed something else. His hands were shaking, not just from cold or fear, but like he could not control them, and his eyes kept looking around, searching for dangers that were not there. "Thomas," Sarah said carefully, "when did you eat last?" He thought for a moment. "Yesterday, I think. The church gave me soup yesterday afternoon." Sarah made a decision. Instead of just moving Thomas along to become someone else's problem, she wanted to help him find real solutions. But first, she had to deal with the immediate situation. "All right, Thomas, let's walk to my car," Sarah said. "We need to talk about finding you a better place to stay." As they walked away from the shop, Sarah had no idea that this simple encounter would change both of their lives forever. Thomas walked slowly beside Officer Martinez toward her patrol car. His legs felt weak, and every few steps he had to stop to catch his breath. The military backpack seemed to weigh 100 pounds, even though Sarah could see it did not have much inside it. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked, his voice still confused and worried. "I just want to talk to you about some options," Sarah said. "Maybe we can find you a shelter or get you connected with some services." But as they reached the patrol car, something changed in Thomas's behavior. He stopped walking and stared at the black and white police car with its lights on top. His breathing became faster and his eyes grew wide with fear. "No," he said, backing away from the car. "No, I can't get in there. That's not safe." Sarah was confused. "Thomas, it's okay. It's just my patrol car. We're just going to talk." But Thomas was not hearing her words anymore. In his mind, he was not standing on a street in Phoenix. He was back in Afghanistan, and the police car looked like a military vehicle that might have a bomb hidden underneath it. His training from the war kicked in, and all he could think about was staying alive. "IED!" Thomas shouted suddenly. "There's an IED under that vehicle!" "Everyone get back!" People walking to work stopped and stared. Some took out their phones and started recording. Sarah realized that Thomas was having some kind of flashback, but she was not sure what to do about it. "Thomas, listen to me," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You're safe. You're in Phoenix, Arizona. There are no bombs here." But Thomas could not hear her. In his mind, he was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez again, and his job was to protect his men from danger. He saw the patrol car as a threat, and he saw Sarah in her police uniform as someone who did not understand the danger they were all in. "You don't understand," Thomas shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. "We have to get everyone away from here. People are going to die." Sarah felt Thomas's grip on her arm and saw the wild look in his eyes. She had been trained to handle difficult situations, but she had never dealt with someone having a war flashback before. Her training told her to stay calm and try to de-escalate the situation. "Thomas, I need you to let go of my arm," Sarah said firmly but gently. "You're safe. There's no danger here." But Thomas's grip only got tighter. In his mind, Sarah was a fellow soldier who was not taking the threat seriously. He had lost friends because people did not listen to warnings about bombs. He was not going to let that happen again. "Listen to me," Thomas said, his voice getting louder. "I've seen what these things can do. I've seen good people die because no one listened." More people stopped to watch. Some were taking videos with their phones. Sarah could see that the situation was getting out of control, and she knew she had to do something before someone got hurt. "Thomas, I'm going to count to 3, and I need you to let go of my arm," Sarah said, using her firm police voice. 1, 2. But before she could say 3, Thomas suddenly let go of her arm and stumbled backward. For a moment his eyes cleared and he seemed to remember where he was. He looked around at all the people staring at him and taking pictures. Then he looked at Sarah in her police uniform and a new kind of fear filled his face. "Oh no," Thomas whispered. "What did I do? Did I hurt you?" "You didn't hurt me, Thomas," Sarah said quickly. "But I need you to stay calm so we can figure this out." But Thomas was spiraling into panic. He saw the crowd of people, the phones recording him and the police officer in front of him. All of it together was too much for his damaged mind to handle. He started backing away from Sarah, shaking his head. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I was just trying to help. I was trying to keep everyone safe." Sarah stepped toward him, trying to keep the situation under control. "Thomas, just stay where you are. We can work this out." But Thomas kept backing up. He was not thinking clearly anymore. All he knew was that he was in trouble with the police, and bad things happened to people who got in trouble with the police. His mind was a mix of memories from the war and fears about what would happen to him now. "I have to go," Thomas said, turning around and starting to walk quickly away from the scene. Sarah knew she could not let him leave like this. He was clearly having a mental health crisis, and he might be a danger to himself or others. She also knew that a crowd was watching and recording everything she did. "Thomas, stop," Sarah called out. "I need you to come back here." But Thomas did not stop. If anything, he walked faster. Sarah had to make a quick decision. She could let him go and hope he calmed down on his own, or she could stop him and try to get him the help he clearly needed. Sarah made the choice that her training told her to make. She jogged after Thomas and caught up with him at the corner of the block. "Thomas, I need you to stop and talk to me," Sarah said, putting her hand on his shoulder. The touch on his shoulder was like a trigger for Thomas. In his confused state, he thought he was being attacked. He spun around quickly, his military training taking over. He raised his hands in a defensive position, ready to fight off what he saw as an enemy. "Don't touch me," Thomas shouted. "Stay back." Sarah saw the defensive posture and knew that Thomas might try to fight her. She had dealt with people resisting arrest before, but this felt different. Thomas was not a criminal trying to get away. He was a sick man who was scared and confused. "Thomas, I don't want to hurt you," Sarah said, holding up her hands to show she was not a threat. "I just want to help you." But Thomas was too far gone into his flashback to understand her words. All he could see was someone in a uniform who was trying to capture him. His breathing was fast and shallow, and sweat poured down his face. The crowd from the electronics store had followed them, and more people were gathering. Someone shouted, "Just arrest him already." Another person yelled, "Leave him alone. Can't you see he's sick?" Sarah knew she had to end this before it got worse. She reached for her radio to call for backup, and that movement made Thomas panic even more. "Gun," Thomas shouted, thinking Sarah was reaching for her weapon. "She's going for her gun." Thomas lunged forward not to attack Sarah, but to try to protect himself and others from what he thought was a deadly threat. He grabbed for Sarah's radio, trying to stop what he believed was going to be an attack. Sarah felt Thomas grab for her equipment and knew she had to protect herself. She used her training to restrain him, but Thomas fought back with the desperation of someone who thought he was fighting for his life. "I need backup at 5th and Main," Sarah spoke into her radio as she struggled with Thomas. "I have a subject in mental health crisis." The fight only lasted about 30 seconds, but it felt much longer to both Sarah and Thomas. Finally, Sarah was able to get Thomas on the ground and put handcuffs on him. He was breathing hard and still shouting about bombs and enemies. "Please don't hurt me," Thomas said over and over. "I was just trying to help. I was just trying to do my job." Sarah sat back on her heels, breathing hard. She looked down at Thomas, who was crying now, and seemed to realize what had happened. The warrior who had been fighting imaginary enemies was gone, and in his place was a broken man who was more scared than dangerous. 2 more patrol cars arrived with their sirens wailing. Officers Johnson and Davis got out and ran over to help. "What's the situation?" Officer Johnson asked. Sarah looked down at Thomas, who had stopped struggling and was just lying on the ground with tears running down his face. She could hear people in the crowd talking about the crazy homeless man who attacked a police officer. But looking at Thomas now, all she could see was someone who was very sick and very alone. Mental health crisis. Sarah said quietly, "He's a veteran. I think he was having flashbacks." Officer Davis helped Sarah get Thomas to his feet. He did not resist anymore. All the fight had gone out of him, and he just looked confused and ashamed. "I'm sorry," Thomas kept saying. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." As they walked Thomas to the patrol car, Sarah noticed that his military backpack had fallen during the struggle. She picked it up, feeling how light it was. Everything this man owned in the world weighed less than her duty belt. The crowd was still watching and recording as they put Thomas in the back of the patrol car. Sarah could already imagine the headlines. "Homeless man attacks police officer," or "Violent vagrant arrested downtown." She knew that no one would see the full story of what had really happened here. As they drove toward the police station, Sarah looked in her rearview mirror at Thomas. He was sitting quietly now, staring out the window with empty eyes. She could see that he was back in the real world, and he understood that his life had just gotten much more complicated. "Thomas," Sarah said gently, "we're going to the station now. Someone there will help you." Thomas did not respond. He just kept staring out the window at the city that was supposed to be his home, but felt like foreign territory. In the distance, Sarah could hear sirens from other emergency calls, and she wondered how many other Thomas Rodriguezes were out there, fighting invisible wars on the streets of her city. The Phoenix police station was busy with the usual Tuesday morning activity. Officers came and went, phones rang constantly, and the coffee machine worked overtime. Sarah guided Thomas through the back entrance, his hands still cuffed behind his back. He walked slowly, like each step took great effort. The booking area smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. It was not a pleasant place, but it was clean and safe. Thomas looked around with tired eyes, taking in the gray walls, the metal benches, and the officers doing their paperwork. "Sit here," Sarah said gently, helping Thomas onto a bench near the booking desk. "I'll be right back." Desk Sergeant Mike O'Brien looked up from his computer as Sarah approached. Mike had been with the department for 22 years, and he had seen everything at least twice. He was a big man with gray hair and kind eyes that had learned to see past the surface of things. "What do we have here, Martinez?" Mike asked, looking over at Thomas. "Homeless veteran," Sarah said quietly. "Had some kind of flashback episode. Thought my patrol car was an IED. Got physical when I tried to calm him down." Mike nodded. He had heard stories like this before. "PTSD? I think so," Sarah said. "He was talking about patrols in Kandahar, calling me by military rank. When he came back to reality, he seemed like a completely different person." Mike walked over to where Thomas was sitting. The man looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of fear and resignation. Mike had seen that look before in his own mirror many years ago. "What's your name, son?" Mike asked in a voice that was firm but not unkind. "Thomas Rodriguez," Thomas said quietly. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez. I mean former Staff Sergeant. I'm not in the Army anymore." "When did you get out, Thomas?" Thomas thought for a moment, like the question was harder than it should be. 2 years ago, I think. Maybe longer. Time gets confusing sometimes." Mike exchanged a look with Sarah. 2 years was not that long, but Thomas looked like he had been living rough for much longer than that. His face was thin, his clothes were worn out, and there was a tired look in his eyes that spoke of many nights without good sleep. "All right, Thomas, we need to go through your belongings," Mike said. "It's just procedure. We'll give everything back to you." Sarah brought over Thomas's military backpack and the plastic bag with his other things. Mike opened the backpack carefully, treating it with the respect he would give to any veteran's gear. The first thing he pulled out was a small American flag, folded in the traditional triangle shape. It was worn and faded, but it had been cared for. Underneath the flag was something that made Mike stop and take a deeper breath. "Sarah, come look at this," Mike said quietly. In his hand was a Purple Heart medal, still in its original case. The medal was clean and polished, despite everything else Thomas owned being worn and dirty. Next to the medal was a certificate that showed Thomas had been awarded the Purple Heart for wounds received in action in Afghanistan. "Thomas," Mike said, holding up the medal case, can you tell me about this?" Thomas looked at the Purple Heart with a mixture of pride and pain. IED hit our convoy, he said simply. I lost two good friends that day. Martinez and Johnson. They were both younger than me. Had families waiting for them at home. Sarah felt a chill run through her. She realized that when Thomas had grabbed her arm and shouted about IEDs, he was not just having a random flashback. He was reliving the day his friends died, and he was trying to save her from the same fate. Mike continued going through the backpack. There were discharge papers showing that Thomas had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had been honorably discharged. There were also several prescription bottles, all empty, with dates showing that Thomas had not been able to refill his medications in over 4 months. What are these medications for, Thomas? Mike asked, showing him the empty bottles. PTSD, Thomas said, and headaches from the brain injury. The explosion that got me the Purple Heart also scrambled my brain a little. The doctors at the VA hospital said the pills would help, but what? Sarah asked. Thomas looked down at his hands. I lost my apartment about 6 months ago. Medical bills from when I first got home were too much. When I became homeless, I lost my address. When I lost my address, I couldn't get my mail. When I couldn't get my mail, I couldn't get my medication refilled. The VA system requires an address. Mike shook his head. He had heard this story before from other veterans. The system that was supposed to help them sometimes created barriers that were impossible to overcome. In the plastic bag, there were only a few pieces of clothing, all clean but worn thin. There was also a notebook wrapped in plastic to keep it dry. Mike opened the notebook and found page after page of neat handwriting. What's this, Thomas? Letters, Thomas said. Letters to the families of Martinez and Johnson. The guys who died in the explosion with me. I write to them every day, but I don't have addresses to send them to. And I don't have money for stamps. Sarah looked over Mike's shoulder at the notebook. The pages were filled with messages to families Thomas had never met, telling them about their sons and husbands, sharing memories of good times before the explosion. Every letter ended the same way. I'm sorry I couldn't save them. I think about them every day. Mike closed the notebook gently and put it back in the plastic bag. He looked at Thomas with new understanding. This was not just a homeless man who had caused a disturbance. This was a combat veteran who was carrying wounds that no one could see. Thomas, when did you last have a real meal? Mike asked. The church downtown serves soup on Mondays, Thomas said. That was yesterday, I think. And when did you last sleep indoors? Thomas thought about this for a long time. I don't remember, he finally said. It's been warm weather, so sleeping outside hasn't been too bad. Winter was harder. Sarah realized that Thomas had been living on the streets for months, maybe longer, with untreated PTSD and brain injury. No wonder he was confused and having flashbacks. His mind was trying to deal with trauma without any help from medication or therapy. Mike called over Officer Lisa Chen, who was the department's crisis intervention specialist. Lisa had training in dealing with people who had mental health problems, and she often worked with homeless individuals. Lisa, can you come talk with Mr. Rodriguez here? Mike asked. He's a veteran with PTSD who's been living on the streets. Lisa pulled up a chair and sat down next to Thomas. She had a calm way about her that seemed to help people relax. Hi, Thomas, I'm Officer Chen. I work with people who are going through tough times. Can you tell me what's been happening with you? For the next hour, Lisa talked with Thomas about his situation. She learned that he had been a good soldier who loved his country and his fellow soldiers. She learned that he had come home from war with invisible wounds that made it hard for him to work or maintain relationships. She learned that he had tried to get help from the VA, but the system was slow and complicated. The worst part, Thomas told Lisa, is that I feel like I failed everyone. I failed my army buddies who died. I failed my family who expected me to come home and be normal. I failed myself by ending up on the streets. Sometimes I think everyone would be better off if I had died in that explosion too. Sarah felt her heart break as she listened to Thomas talk. Here was a man who had served his country with honor, and now he was living on the streets and feeling like his life had no value. Mike pulled Sarah aside while Lisa continued talking with Thomas. Martinez, what do you want to do here? We could charge him with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. But looking at his situation, I'm not sure that's going to help anyone. Sarah looked back at Thomas, who was showing Lisa a small photo he kept in his wallet. It was a picture of his unit in Afghanistan, taken before the explosion that changed everything. In the photo, Thomas was smiling, standing with his arm around the two friends he had lost. Sarge, what if we don't charge him with anything? Sarah asked. What if we try to get him some real help instead? Mike raised his eyebrows. What do you have in mind? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted. But arresting him isn't going to solve his problems. He needs medical care, housing, and help navigating the VA system. Maybe there's someone we can call. Mike thought about this. In his 22 years on the force, he had arrested hundreds of homeless people. Most of them came back to the streets within a few days, and their problems were never solved. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. All right, Martinez, Mike said. But if we're going to do something different, we need to do it right. We need to find people who actually know how to help veterans like Thomas. Sarah nodded. She pulled out her phone and started looking up veteran services in Phoenix. She had never thought much about homeless veterans before, but now she was determined to learn everything she could. Meanwhile, Lisa finished her conversation with Thomas and came over to talk to Mike and Sarah. He's stable right now, she said. The flashback episode is over and he's thinking clearly, but he's dealing with serious mental health issues that need professional treatment. What do you recommend? Mike asked. He needs to be reconnected with VA services, Lisa said. He needs housing, medication, and counseling. But most importantly, he needs someone to help him navigate the system. A lot of veterans get lost in the bureaucracy and give up. Thomas sat quietly on the bench. While Thomas sat in the holding area talking with Officer Chen, Sarah made her way to the computer terminal at her desk. She had decided that before she could help Thomas, she needed to understand exactly what he had been through. The military discharge papers had given her some basic information, but she wanted to know more. Sarah logged into the police database and started searching for any records related to Thomas Rodriguez. What she found surprised her. Unlike many homeless individuals who had long criminal histories, Thomas had no arrests, no warrants, and no history of causing trouble. The only time his name appeared in police reports was from calls where business owners had asked for him to be moved along from doorways and park benches. That's unusual, Sarah muttered to herself. Most people who had been homeless for months had at least some minor arrest for trespassing or public intoxication. Thomas seemed to have been trying very hard to stay out of trouble. Sarah then turned to her personal computer and started researching Thomas's military service. She had the unit information from his discharge papers, so she was able to find news articles about the 3rd Infantry Division's deployment to Afghanistan. The first article she found made her stomach turn. It was from a military newspaper dated about 3 years ago. The headline read, "IED attack kills 2 soldiers, injures 3 others." As Sarah read the article, she realized she was looking at the day that changed Thomas's life forever. According to the article, Staff Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez had been leading a patrol in a dangerous area outside Kandahar when their convoy hit a roadside bomb. The explosion killed Sergeant David Martinez, age 22, and Corporal James Johnson, age 24. 3 other soldiers were injured, including Rodriguez, who suffered traumatic brain injury and shrapnel wounds. Sarah read further and found a follow-up article about Thomas receiving the Purple Heart. There was even a small photo of the ceremony, showing Thomas in his dress uniform, standing at attention while a general pinned the medal to his chest. But even in the photo, Sarah could see that something was wrong. Thomas's eyes looked empty, and his face showed no joy or pride, only pain. The article mentioned that Thomas had been recommended for the Bronze Star as well, for his actions during the attack. After the explosion, despite his own injuries, Thomas had stayed conscious long enough to call for medical help and provide covering fire while his wounded soldiers were evacuated. His quick thinking had saved the lives of the 3 other injured soldiers. Sarah leaned back in her chair, trying to process what she had learned. Thomas was not just a veteran. He was a decorated hero who had risked his life to save others. And now he was living on the streets, forgotten by the country he had served. She decided to dig deeper into Thomas's story. Using his full name and military service number from the discharge papers, Sarah was able to access some VA records through the police department's database sharing agreement. What she found made her angry. Thomas had initially been enrolled in VA services when he returned from Afghanistan. He had been assigned to a caseworker and had been receiving both disability payments and mental health treatment. His records showed that he had been making progress in his recovery, attending regular therapy sessions and taking medication for his PTSD and brain injury. But about 8 months ago, Something had gone wrong. Sarah found a notice in the file indicating that Thomas had missed several appointments. His caseworker had tried to contact him, but the phone number on file was no longer working. When mail sent to his address was returned as undeliverable, the VA had suspended his services pending a current address verification. Sarah realized that this must have been around the time Thomas lost his apartment. She searched for more information and found records showing that Thomas had been struggling to pay his rent due to medical bills that were not covered by his VA benefits. When he could no longer afford his apartment, he had become homeless. When he became homeless, he lost his address. When he lost his address, the VA dropped him from their services. It was a cruel catch-22. Thomas needed the VA services to get his life back together, but he could not access those services without a stable address, and he could not get a stable address without the financial support and mental health care that the VA was supposed to provide. Sarah printed out several pages of information about Thomas's military service and VA history. She also found contact information for the VA's Homeless Veteran Outreach Program. She had heard about this program but had never worked with them before. As she was gathering this information, Sergeant O'Brien walked over to her desk. "Finding anything useful, Martinez?" "More than I expected," Sarah said, showing him the articles about Thomas's military service. "Mike, this guy is a legitimate war hero. He saved lives under fire and earned a Purple Heart. But the system failed him completely." Mike read through the articles with growing concern. "So he goes from decorated soldier to homeless in less than 2 years?" "That's exactly what happened," Sarah said. "And it looks like it could have been prevented if someone had just helped him navigate the VA system when he lost his apartment." Mike shook his head. "You know, Martinez, I served in Vietnam. Different war, different time, but some things never change. We send these kids off to fight, and when they come home broken, we don't always know how to fix them." "Were you homeless when you came back?" Sarah asked. "No, but I came close," Mike admitted. "I had family support and a job waiting for me. But I still struggled with nightmares and anger for years. I can't imagine trying to deal with that while living on the streets." Sarah looked back toward the holding area, where Thomas was still talking with Officer Chen. From where she sat, she could see him showing Chen something from his wallet, probably the photo of his army buddies that he had shown earlier. "Mike, what if we could get him reconnected with the VA? What if we could help him get his benefits restored and find him housing?" "That's a nice idea, Martinez, but we're cops, not social workers," Mike said. "We don't really have the training or resources to handle something like this." "But we could connect him with people who do," Sarah insisted. "Look at this." She showed Mike the information she had found about the VA's Homeless Veteran Outreach Program. They have specialists who work specifically with veterans who have fallen through the cracks. Mike read the information carefully. It says here they have a rapid rehousing program for veterans. They can provide emergency shelter, help with benefit applications, and case management services. "Exactly," Sarah said. "Instead of charging Thomas with resisting arrest and putting him in jail for a few days, we could connect him with people who might actually be able to turn his life around." Mike was quiet for a moment, thinking about the options. "Martinez, you know that if we don't charge him, and he ends up causing problems somewhere else, it's going to reflect badly on us." "I understand that," Sarah said. "But look at his record. He's been homeless for months and he's never been arrested for anything. He's not a troublemaker. He's a sick man who needs medical care." Sarah pulled up another screen on her computer and showed Mike what she had found. "Look at this. The VA Rapid Rehousing Program has an 85% success rate in getting homeless veterans into permanent housing within 90 days. And once they're housed, 90% of them stay housed for at least a year." "Those are good numbers," Mike admitted. "And here's the best part," Sarah said, scrolling down to another section. "Veterans who complete this program have less than a 5% rearrest rate. Compare that to the 60% rearrest rate for homeless individuals who go through the regular court system." Mike looked at the statistics and then looked over at Thomas. "So you're saying that if we connect him with this program, he's more likely to get his life together and less likely to end up back in our jail?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Sarah said. "It's better for Thomas, better for the community, and better for us." Mike was starting to see the logic in Sarah's plan. "All right, Martinez. But if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. We can't just make a phone call and hope for the best. We need to make sure Thomas actually gets connected with these services. I already thought of that, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. I'm going to call the outreach coordinator right now and see if they can send someone down here to meet with Thomas today. Sarah dialed the number for the VA Homeless Outreach Program. After being transferred twice, she reached Maria Santos, the program coordinator for the Phoenix area. Ms. Santos, this is Officer Martinez with the Phoenix Police Department. I have a homeless veteran here who I think could benefit from your services. Tell me about his situation, Maria said. Her voice was professional but warm, and Sarah could tell that she cared about her work. Sarah explained Thomas's military background, his mental health issues, and how he had ended up on the streets. She also mentioned his episode that morning and how it had led to his arrest. It sounds like he's exactly the kind of veteran our program is designed to help, Maria said. Has he been charged with anything? Not yet, Sarah said. We were hoping we could connect him with your services instead of putting him through the court system. I like the way you think, Officer Martinez, Maria said. Can you give me about an hour? I'll drive down to the station and meet with him personally. That would be fantastic, Sarah said. An hour later, Maria Santos walked into the Phoenix police station carrying a large bag and wearing a smile that seemed to light up the room. She was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Everything about her seemed designed to make people feel comfortable and safe. Sarah met Maria at the front desk and led her back to where Thomas was waiting. As they walked, Maria asked questions about Thomas's condition and what had happened that morning. The most important thing to understand, Maria told Sarah, is that what happened to Thomas this morning was not his fault. PTSD and traumatic brain injury can cause people to react to situations in ways that seem crazy to others, but make perfect sense to them in the moment. When they reached the holding area, Thomas looked up nervously. He had been disappointed by so many people over the past few months that he had learned to expect nothing from new promises of help. Thomas, this is Maria Santos from the VA Homeless Outreach Program, Sarah said. She's here to talk with you about some options. Maria sat down next to Thomas and immediately put him at ease with her calm, friendly manner. Hi, Thomas. I understand you've had a rough few months. I'm here to see if we can help make things better. Are you from the VA? Thomas asked suspiciously. Because I already tried working with them, and they dropped me when I lost my apartment. I work with the VA, but I'm part of a special program for veterans who have fallen through the cracks, Maria explained. My job is specifically to help veterans who have become homeless get reconnected with services and find stable housing. How is that different from regular VA services? Thomas asked. Maria opened her bag and pulled out a folder. Regular VA services require you to have a stable address and to be able to keep appointments during business hours. Our program is designed for people whose lives are too chaotic for that kind of structure. We meet you where you are, literally and figuratively. Thomas was interested despite himself. What does that mean exactly? It means that if you're sleeping under a bridge, I'll meet you under the bridge, Maria said. If you can only meet at 6 a.m. because that's when you feel most clear-headed, I'll be there at 6 a.m. If you miss an appointment because you're having a bad day, I won't drop you from the program. I'll just try again the next day. Sarah watched Thomas's face as Maria talked. She could see him starting to hope, even though he was trying not to. What kind of help can you actually provide? Thomas asked. Maria pulled several pamphlets out of her folder. First, emergency housing. We have partnerships with several facilities that provide immediate shelter specifically for veterans. These aren't like regular homeless shelters. They're smaller, quieter, and the staff understands military culture and trauma issues. Thomas looked at the pamphlet showing a clean, simple room with a bed, a desk, and a window. After months of sleeping on concrete, it looked like luxury to him. How long can someone stay there? He asked. Up to 90 days while we work on finding permanent housing, Maria said. But most veterans move to permanent housing much faster than that. Permanent housing? Thomas asked. You mean like an apartment? Exactly like an apartment, Maria said, showing him another pamphlet. We have partnerships with landlords throughout the city who specifically rent to veterans in our program. The rent is subsidized based on your income, and we provide case management support to help you maintain your housing. Thomas stared at the pictures of apartments with kitchens and bathrooms and living rooms. I haven't had my own kitchen in 8 months, he said quietly. That can change, Maria said gently. But housing is just the beginning. Let me tell you about the other services. Maria explained that the program also provided help with getting VA benefits restored, medical care, mental health counseling, job training, and financial counseling. They even had specialists who helped veterans deal with debt and financial problems that had contributed to their homelessness. The medical care part is really important for you, Maria said, looking at the empty prescription bottles that were still sitting on the table from when Thomas's belongings had been searched. We can get you reconnected with mental health services and make sure you get back on your medications. Will I have to wait months for appointments? Thomas asked. No, Maria said. We have our own medical team that works specifically with homeless veterans. We can usually get people seen within a few days, sometimes the same day for urgent situations. Thomas looked at Sarah as if asking her opinion. Sarah nodded encouragingly. What's the catch? Thomas asked Maria. This sounds too good to be true. Maria smiled. The catch is that you have to be willing to work with us. You have to be willing to take your medications, attend counseling sessions, and follow the rules of whatever housing we place you in. And you have to be patient because getting your life back together takes time. I can do those things, Thomas said quickly. I want to do those things. I'm tired of living like this. Good, Maria said, because I think you'd be a perfect fit for our program. But before we go any further, I need to ask you some questions about your current situation and your goals. For the next 30 minutes, Maria interviewed Thomas about his military service, his mental health, his substance use history, and what he wanted his life to look like in the future. Sarah was impressed by how thorough Maria was, but also by how she asked difficult questions in a way that didn't make Thomas feel judged or ashamed. Thomas, have you ever used illegal drugs or had problems with alcohol? Maria asked. No, ma'am, Thomas said. I've seen what that stuff does to people, especially people with PTSD. I've been tempted sometimes when the nightmares get really bad, but I've never used anything stronger than the medications the doctors prescribed. That's excellent, Maria said, making notes in Thomas's file.
Substance abuse can complicate treatment, so the fact that you've avoided that will make your recovery much easier. Maria asked about Thomas's family and support system.
Thomas explained that his parents had died several years ago, and he had lost touch with his siblings after he became homeless. He was embarrassed about his situation and had stopped answering their calls and letters. Do you think your family would be supportive if you reached out to them once you're more stable? Maria asked. Thomas thought about this. Maybe. My sister Elena called me a lot when I first got back from Afghanistan, but I was so angry and difficult to be around that I think I pushed her away. I haven't talked to her in over a year. Rebuilding family relationships can be part of your recovery process, Maria said, but that's something to worry about later, after you get your immediate needs taken care of. After finishing her assessment, Maria looked over her notes and smiled at Thomas. I'm happy to tell you that you qualify for all of our services. If you're willing, I can get you placed in emergency housing today. Thomas looked stunned. Today? You mean I could have a bed to sleep in tonight? Absolutely, Maria said. I've already called our emergency housing coordinator, and we have a bed available at Phoenix Veterans Village. It's a new facility specifically designed for veterans who are transitioning off the streets. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. When she had started her shift that morning, she thought she was just dealing with another routine homeless complaint. Now she was watching a man's life potentially change for the better. There's just one more thing we need to discuss, Maria said to Thomas. Officer Martinez told me about what happened this morning, and about the charges that could be filed against you. Thomas's face fell. He had been so caught up in the possibility of getting help that he had forgotten he was still technically under arrest. Now, I've worked with Officer Martinez and her supervisor, and they've agreed to drop all charges if you're willing to enter our program, Maria continued. But you need to understand that this is contingent on your participation. If you drop out of the program or violate its rules, the charges could be refiled. I understand, Thomas said, and I want you to know that I would never have grabbed Officer Martinez if I had been thinking clearly. I thought I was still in Afghanistan, and I thought I was trying to save her life. Sarah stood up and walked over to Thomas. Thomas, I want you to know that I understand what happened this morning. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to protect me, just like you protected your fellow soldiers in Afghanistan. Thomas looked up at her with tears in his eyes. Thank you for saying that, Officer Martinez. I've been feeling terrible about it all day. You don't need to feel terrible, Sarah said. You need to get better, and it sounds like Maria has a good plan to help you do that. Maria stood up and gathered her paperwork. Thomas, if you're ready, we can go to Phoenix Veterans Village right now. They're expecting you and they'll have a room ready. Thomas looked around the police station, then at his military backpack containing all his worldly possessions. You mean I can just leave? I can just walk out of here and go to this place? That's exactly what I mean, Maria said. You're not a criminal, Thomas. You're a veteran who needs help, and we're here to provide that help. Thomas stood up slowly, still not quite believing that his luck had changed so dramatically. He picked up his backpack and his plastic bag of belongings, then turned to Sarah. Phoenix Veterans Village was different from any homeless shelter Thomas had ever seen. Instead of one large room filled with cots and the smell of unwashed bodies, it was a collection of small buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Each building housed only 12 veterans, and each veteran had their own small room with a bed, a desk, and a window. Maria led Thomas through the main entrance, where a security guard who was also a veteran greeted them warmly. The walls were decorated with American flags and photos of military units from different wars. Thomas immediately felt more comfortable than he had in any shelter before. Welcome to Phoenix Veterans Village, said a tall man with gray hair and a firm handshake. I'm Robert Walsh, the facility director. I understand you're coming to us from a difficult situation. Thomas nodded. Yes, sir. I've been on the streets for about 6 months. Well, you're safe now, Robert said. Let me show you to your room, and then we'll get you oriented to how things work here. Thomas's room was small but clean. It had a single bed with crisp white sheets, a small dresser, a desk with a chair, and a window that looked out on the courtyard. After months of sleeping on concrete and cardboard, it felt like a palace. This is really mine, Thomas asked, setting his backpack down carefully on the bed. For as long as you need it, up to 90 days, Robert said. But most of our veterans move to permanent housing much sooner than that. Maria sat down with Thomas and Robert to create what she called an action plan. This was a detailed schedule of appointments and goals for Thomas's first few weeks in the program. Your first priority is getting your medical care back on track, Maria explained. I've already scheduled you for an appointment tomorrow morning with Dr. Sarah Kim. She's a psychiatrist who specializes in PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Will she be able to get me back on my medications? Thomas asked. Absolutely, Maria said. Dr. Kim has access to your complete VA medical records, so she knows exactly what medications you were taking before. She'll probably want to do some adjustments based on how you're doing now, but you should be back on your medications within a day or two. Thomas felt a huge weight lift off his shoulders. The medications had helped him think more clearly and sleep better. Without them, every day had been a struggle just to keep his thoughts organized. What about my VA benefits? Thomas asked. I was getting disability payments before I lost my apartment. That's my next phone call, Maria said, pulling out her cell phone. I have a direct line to the VA benefits coordinator. Your benefits were suspended, not canceled, so it should be relatively easy to get them restored once we have a valid address for you. While Maria made her phone calls, Robert showed Thomas around the facility. There was a common room with comfortable chairs and a big screen TV, a library with books and computers, a laundry room, and a cafeteria that served 3 meals a day. All the staff here are either veterans themselves or people who have special training in working with veterans, Robert explained. We understand what you've been through, and we won't judge you for any struggles you might have. In the common room, Thomas met several other veterans who were in various stages of the program. There was Jim, an older Vietnam veteran who had been homeless for 3 years before finding Phoenix Veterans Village. There was Maria Elena, a young woman who had served in Iraq and was now working part-time while finishing college. And there was David, a Gulf War veteran who had just moved into his own apartment but still came back to visit and encourage newer residents. This place saved my life, David told Thomas. 8 months ago, I was sleeping in my car and drinking myself to death. Now I have my own apartment, a job, and I'm rebuilding my relationship with my kids. How long were you here? Thomas asked. About 2 months, David said. But the support doesn't end when you move out. They have caseworkers who check on you, support groups that meet every week, and emergency help if you run into problems. Meanwhile, Maria was having great success with her phone calls. After 20 minutes of being transferred from department to department, she finally reached someone who could help restore Thomas's VA benefits. Mr. Rodriguez's benefits were suspended due to address verification issues, the benefits coordinator told Maria. But since he's now in an approved transitional housing program, we can restore his benefits immediately. His next payment will be processed within 5 business days. Maria hung up the phone with a big smile. Thomas, I have good news. Your disability benefits will be restored and your first payment will be deposited in about a week. I can't believe this is all happening so fast, Thomas said. I spent months trying to get help, and now everything is falling into place in one day. That's the power of having advocates who know how to work the system, Robert explained. When you're homeless and dealing with PTSD, it's almost impossible to navigate all the bureaucracy on your own. But when you have people making calls for you and cutting through the red tape, things can happen very quickly. Maria made several more phone calls that afternoon. She contacted the VA Employment Services to discuss job training options for Thomas. She reached out to a nonprofit organization that provided free legal help to veterans with debt problems. She even called a program that helped veterans reconnect with family members they had lost touch with. Maria, you don't have to do all this today, Thomas said, watching her work. I'm not going anywhere. I know, Maria said. But I've learned that it's important to build momentum when someone is ready to accept help. Right now you're motivated and hopeful. I want to take advantage of that and get as many pieces in place as possible. That evening, Thomas had his first real meal in months. The cafeteria at Phoenix Veterans Village served home-cooked food prepared by a staff that understood that many of the residents had not eaten regular meals in a long time. Thomas ate slowly, savoring every bite of the meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. After dinner, he attended his first group session. About 8 veterans sat in a circle in a comfortable room and talked about their experiences with homelessness, PTSD, and recovery. A counselor named Mike, who was also a veteran, facilitated the discussion. Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little about your situation? Mike asked. Thomas was nervous about speaking to a group, but everyone seemed friendly and understanding. I'm Thomas Rodriguez. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 3rd Infantry Division. I've been homeless for about 6 months after losing my apartment due to medical bills. What brought you here today? Mike asked. Thomas told the story of his encounter with Officer Martinez and how it had led to meeting Maria and getting connected with the program. As he talked, he noticed that several other veterans were nodding their heads, like they understood exactly what he had been through. I've been there, brother, said Jim, the Vietnam veteran. Different war, same problems. The important thing is that you're here now, and you're ready to get your life back. What's been the hardest part about being homeless? Mike asked. Thomas thought for a moment. The confusion, he said finally. When you don't have a place to belong, your mind starts playing tricks on you. Sometimes I would wake up and not know what city I was in, or what year it was. The PTSD got much worse when I was on the streets. That's very common, Mike said. Homelessness can make mental health issues much worse, but stable housing and regular medication can make a huge difference in how you feel and think. After the group session, Thomas went back to his room and lay down on the clean bed with real sheets and a pillow. For the first time in months, he felt safe enough to really relax. He pulled out the notebook where he wrote letters to the families of his fallen comrades and wrote a new entry. Dear Martinez and Johnson families, he wrote, today was the first good day I've had since you guys died. I met some people who are helping me get my life back together. I think you would be proud of me for not giving up, even when things got really dark. I'm going to keep fighting to get better, and I'm going to find a way to honor your memory by helping other veterans who are struggling like I was. As Thomas prepared for bed, he realized that for the first time in months he was looking forward to tomorrow. He had appointments scheduled, people who cared about his welfare and a real chance to rebuild his life. Down at the police station, Officer Martinez was finishing her shift and thinking about Thomas. She had called Maria earlier to check on how he was doing, and Maria had given her a positive report. Sarah, Sergeant O'Brien said as she was getting ready to leave, I wanted to tell you that what you did today was real police work. You saw a problem and found a solution instead of just processing an arrest. It felt like the right thing to do, Sarah said. Thomas earned better treatment than just getting thrown in jail for having a mental health crisis. You know, Mike said, I've been thinking about what happened today. We probably have dozens of veterans in our patrol area who are in similar situations. Maybe we should think about how we can do better by them. Sarah had been thinking the same thing. What if we set up some kind of training for officers about recognizing PTSD and veteran issues? And what if we develop better relationships with organizations like Maria's program? That's not a bad idea, Mike said. Let me talk to the captain about it. 3 weeks had passed since Thomas's first night at Phoenix Veterans Village, and the change in him was remarkable. The confused, frightened man who had been sleeping in doorways was slowly being replaced by someone who looked more like the decorated soldier he had once been. The first major change came from getting back on his medications. Dr. Kim had indeed been able to restore his PTSD and brain injury medications, and within a week, Thomas noticed a significant improvement in his ability to think clearly and sleep peacefully. The nightmares that had plagued him every night for months became less frequent and less intense. The medications aren't magic, Dr. Kim had explained during one of their sessions. They won't solve all your problems. But they'll give you a foundation to build on. They'll help your brain function better so you can do the real work of healing. Thomas was also attending individual counseling sessions twice a week with a therapist named Carol. Carol specialized in helping veterans process trauma and adjust to civilian life. At first, Thomas had been reluctant to talk about his experiences in Afghanistan, but Carol's patient and understanding approach gradually helped him open up. The guilt is the worst part, Thomas told Carol during one session. I keep thinking that I should have died instead of Martinez and Johnson. They were young guys with families who loved them. I'm just a broken-down soldier who ended up homeless. Thomas, that's called survivor's guilt, and it's very common among combat veterans, Carol explained. But I want you to think about something. If Martinez and Johnson were here right now, what do you think they would want for you? Thomas thought about this question for a long time. They would want me to live a good life. They would want me to be happy and healthy. Exactly, Carol said. The best way to honor their memory is not to destroy yourself with guilt, but to build a life that would make them proud. These conversations were hard, but Thomas could feel them helping him process feelings he had been carrying alone for too long. He started to understand that healing was possible, even if it would take time and hard work. Officer Martinez had kept her promise to check on Thomas's progress. She stopped by Phoenix Veterans Village on a Saturday afternoon to see how he was doing. The difference in his appearance was striking. His hair was clean and neatly trimmed, his clothes were fresh, and most importantly, his eyes looked alert and focused instead of confused and frightened. Officer Martinez, Thomas said when he saw her, standing up from the bench where he had been reading a book. I can't believe you came to visit. I wanted to see how you were doing, Sarah said. You look great, Thomas. How are you feeling? Like a human being again, Thomas said with a smile. I've been back on my medications for 3 weeks now, and it's amazing how much clearer my thinking is. I can read books again. I can have conversations without getting confused, and I'm sleeping through the night most of the time. Sarah was genuinely happy to see the improvement. What else have you been doing here? Thomas gave her a tour of the facility and told her about his daily routine. He was attending group therapy sessions 3 times a week, individual counseling twice a week, and had started participating in a job training program that taught basic computer skills to veterans. The job training is really helping my confidence, Thomas explained. I never thought I'd be able to learn new skills after the brain injury, but the instructors here know how to work with veterans who have cognitive issues. They walked past the common room where several veterans were playing cards and watching television. Thomas introduced Sarah to some of the friends he had made, including Jim, the Vietnam veteran, and Maria Elena, the young woman who had served in Iraq. Thomas has been a great addition to our community here, Maria Elena told Sarah. He's always willing to help new residents get oriented, and he's got a great sense of humor once you get to know him. A sense of humor? Sarah asked, looking at Thomas with surprise. Thomas laughed. I know, hard to believe after you met me having a meltdown in front of a shop, right? But when my brain is working properly and I'm not scared all the time, I'm actually a pretty funny guy. Sarah was impressed by how much Thomas had changed in just 3 weeks. But she was even more impressed when Maria Santos joined them and told her about Thomas's progress with the other aspects of his recovery. His VA benefits have been fully restored, Maria reported. He's receiving his full disability payments, which gives him enough income to afford his own apartment. We've already started looking at permanent housing options. Really? Sarah asked. He's ready to live on his own again? We think so, Maria said. The goal of this program is to get veterans back to independent living as quickly as possible, while ensuring they have the support they need to maintain their housing. Thomas nodded. I'm nervous about it, but I'm also excited. I've been looking at some one-bedroom apartments near here so I can stay close to the support services. What about employment? Sarah asked. That's next on the list, Thomas said. Once I get settled in permanent housing, I'll start looking for work. The job training program here is helping me update my skills, and they have partnerships with employers who specifically hire veterans. As they continued talking, Sarah learned about other aspects of Thomas's recovery that amazed her. He had reconnected with his sister Elena, who lived in California. She had been overjoyed to hear from him and was planning to visit Phoenix in a few weeks. I was so ashamed of being homeless that I stopped answering her calls, Thomas explained. But Carol, my therapist, helped me understand that my family wanted to support me, not judge me. Elena cried when I called her. She said she had been worried sick about me. Thomas had also started volunteering at Phoenix Veterans Village, helping newer residents get oriented to the program. His military experience and leadership skills made him a natural mentor for other veterans who were struggling with similar issues. It feels good to help other people, Thomas said. When I was on the streets, I felt useless, like I had nothing to contribute to society. Now I feel like I have a purpose again. Sarah was particularly interested in hearing about Thomas's work with other veterans. What kind of things do you help them with? Mostly just practical stuff, Thomas said. How to navigate the VA system, how to manage PTSD symptoms, how to rebuild relationships with family, but also just being someone who understands what they've been through. Thomas told Sarah about a young Marine named Carlos, who had arrived at the facility the week before. Carlos had been living in his car for 2 months after losing his job due to untreated PTSD. Carlos reminded me a lot of myself when I first got here, Thomas said. He was angry, confused, and convinced that nobody could help him. But I was able to sit with him and tell him my story, and I think it helped him realize that recovery was possible. Sarah was moved by how Thomas had transformed from someone who needed help into someone who was helping others. That must be very rewarding. It is, Thomas said. But it's also taught me something important. When I was on the streets, I thought I was worthless because I couldn't take care of myself. But now I realize that my experiences, even the bad ones, have value because they help me understand and help other people. As their visit continued, Maria showed Sarah some statistics about the program's success rate. Thomas is pretty typical of our residents, she explained. About 85% of the veterans who complete our program successfully transition to permanent housing, and about 90% of those remain housed after 1 year. Those are impressive numbers, Sarah said. The key is providing comprehensive support, Maria explained. It's not enough just to give someone a place to sleep. You have to address the underlying issues that led to homelessness, mental health problems, substance abuse, lack of job skills, family relationship issues, financial problems. Thomas nodded in agreement. When I was on the streets, people would sometimes give me money or food, which I appreciated. But what I really needed was someone to help me navigate the system and get my life back together. That's what this place does. Sarah spent another hour at the facility, learning about the various programs and services available to veterans. She met with counselors, caseworkers, and other veterans who were at different stages of their recovery. What impressed her most was the sense of community and mutual support among the residents. We look out for each other here, explained Jim, the Vietnam veteran. If someone's having a bad day or struggling with nightmares, there's always someone who understands what they're going through. Before leaving, Sarah had a private conversation with Maria about what she had learned from Thomas's case. I realized that as police officers, we often see veterans like Thomas at their worst moments, when they're having mental health crises or behaving in ways that seem dangerous or disruptive. That's very common, Maria said. Police officers are often the first responders when veterans are in crisis, but most officers don't have training in recognizing PTSD symptoms or knowing about resources that are available. This conversation gave Sarah an idea. What if we could set up some kind of training program for police officers? Something that would help us recognize when someone might be a veteran in crisis and know how to connect them with appropriate services. Maria's eyes lit up. That's a fantastic idea. 3 months after that cold Tuesday morning, when Officer Martinez first encountered Thomas sleeping in a doorway, She stood in the community center auditorium, watching something she never could have imagined. Thomas Rodriguez, wearing a clean button-down shirt and speaking confidently into a microphone, was addressing a room full of police officers, social workers, and community leaders. 6 months ago, I was living on the streets, Thomas said to the audience. I was confused, scared, and convinced that my life was over. When Officer Martinez found me that morning, I thought I was back in Afghanistan. I thought her patrol car was an enemy vehicle with a bomb under it. Sarah smiled as she listened to Thomas tell his story. She had helped organize this community forum on veteran homelessness, and Thomas had volunteered to be the keynote speaker. The transformation in him was still remarkable to see. He now had his own apartment, a part-time job with a nonprofit organization that helped homeless veterans, and was taking college classes to finish his degree in social work. The point I want to make, Thomas continued, is that what looked like a criminal situation was actually a medical emergency. I wasn't trying to cause trouble or hurt anyone. I was having a PTSD flashback that made me believe I was in mortal danger. In the audience, dozens of police officers were taking notes. This was the third training session Sarah had helped organize since Thomas's case. The program had been so successful that departments from other cities were asking for similar training. Maria Santos, who was sitting in the front row, had been instrumental in developing the training curriculum. She had worked with Sarah and Sergeant O'Brien to create a comprehensive program that taught officers how to recognize signs of PTSD, how to de-escalate situations involving veterans in crisis, and how to connect veterans with appropriate services. The most important thing Officer Martinez did, Thomas told the audience, was to see me as a human being who needed help, not just as a problem that needed to be solved. Instead of simply arresting me and moving on, she took the time to understand my situation and connect me with people who could help. After Thomas finished his presentation, there was a panel discussion featuring Maria, Sarah, Dr. Kim, and Robert Walsh from Phoenix Veterans Village. They talked about the resources available for homeless veterans and how law enforcement could work better with service providers. The key is early intervention, Dr. Kim explained to the audience. When veterans like Thomas get connected with services quickly, before their situations become desperate, they have much better outcomes. One police officer in the audience raised his hand. How do we know if someone is a veteran? A lot of homeless people don't carry identification or don't want to talk to police. Thomas stood up to answer this question. There are usually signs if you know what to look for. Military bearing even when someone is down and out, military-style backpacks or clothing, sometimes tattoos or other military symbols, and often veterans will respond to military terminology or rank structure, even when they're having mental health episodes. Sarah added her perspective. The most important thing is to approach people with respect and patience. Take time to really listen to what they're saying. Sometimes what sounds like random rambling actually contains important clues about someone's background and needs. After the panel discussion, there was a networking session where police officers could meet with representatives from various veteran service organizations. Sarah was pleased to see so many officers engaged in learning about resources they could use to help veterans in their communities. During a break in the program, Thomas approached Sarah. Officer Martinez, I have something I want to show you. He led her outside to the parking lot, where a small white Honda Civic was parked. I got my driver's license back last month, and this week I bought my first car in over 2 years. Sarah was genuinely excited for him. Thomas, that's fantastic. How does it feel to have your independence back? Amazing, Thomas said. But you know what feels even better? Last week I was able to drive to Carlos's apartment to check on him when he was having a bad day. Remember Carlos, the young Marine I told you about? Sarah nodded. Carlos had been one of the veterans Thomas had mentored at Phoenix Veterans Village. He moved into his own place last month, but he was struggling with some anxiety about living alone, Thomas explained. Because I have a car now, I was able to go over there and spend the evening with him, just talking and making sure he was okay. You've become quite the advocate, Sarah observed. I've found my purpose, Thomas said. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm contributing to something meaningful. Thomas had indeed found his calling in helping other veterans. His part-time job with the nonprofit was turning into a full-time position, and he was considering applying for a caseworker position with the VA once he finished his degree. I've been thinking about something, Thomas said as they walked back toward the community center. I want to write a letter to the families of Martinez and Johnson, the soldiers who died in the explosion with me." "That sounds like a meaningful thing to do," Sarah said. "Have you been able to find their contact information?" "Actually, yes," Thomas said. "One of my counselors helped me get in touch with a military casualty assistance officer who was able to provide contact information for both families. They both said they would like to hear from me." Thomas explained that he had been working with his therapist, Carol, to prepare for these conversations. He wanted to share positive memories of their sons and husbands, and to let the families know that their loved ones had died serving alongside someone who was now living a productive and meaningful life. "I think it will be healing for all of us," Thomas said. "For months I carried this guilt that I survived when they didn't. But now I understand that the best way to honor their memory is to live a life that would make them proud." As the community forum resumed, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that morning 3 months ago. Not only had Thomas's life been transformed, but the entire approach to veteran issues in the Phoenix Police Department had evolved. The department had developed new protocols for handling situations involving veterans in crisis. Officers now carried cards with contact information for veteran services, and they had been trained to recognize signs of PTSD and other service-related conditions. "We've seen a 60% reduction in arrests of homeless veterans since we started this program," Sergeant O'Brien reported to the audience. "And more importantly, we've seen significant increases in the number of veterans who get connected with services and housing." The success of the program had attracted attention from other cities. Police departments from around the state were sending officers to Phoenix to learn about the training program and protocols that had been developed. During the final session of the forum, Thomas was joined on stage by 3 other veterans who had been helped by the program. Each of them told their story of how police officers had connected them with services instead of simply arresting them. "The beautiful thing about this approach," said Maria Elena, the young woman veteran who had become friends with Thomas at Phoenix Veterans Village, "is that it recognizes that veterans are not criminals. We're people who served our country and came home with injuries that aren't always visible." As the forum concluded, Sarah felt a deep sense of pride in what had been accomplished. What had started as a single encounter with one confused and frightened veteran had grown into a comprehensive program that was helping dozens of veterans get their lives back on track. After the audience had left, Sarah found herself alone with Thomas in the now empty auditorium. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, I never could have imagined you'd be standing on a stage teaching police officers how to better serve veterans." Thomas laughed. "Trust me, I couldn't have imagined it either. 6 months ago, I could barely have a conversation without getting confused. Now I'm giving presentations to rooms full of people." "What do you think made the difference?" Sarah asked. Thomas thought about this for a moment. "Having someone believe in me when I couldn't believe in myself," he said. "You saw something worth saving even when I was at my absolute worst. That gave me hope, and hope gave me the strength to do the work of getting better." They walked out of the community center together into the warm Phoenix evening. In the distance, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I have one more thing to tell you," Thomas said as they reached Sarah's patrol car. "Next month, I'm starting classes to become a peer counselor. I'll be working specifically with veterans who are transitioning from military to civilian life, trying to help them before they end up on the streets." "That's perfect," Sarah said. "You'll be able to help prevent other veterans from going through what you went through." "Exactly," Thomas said. "And I'm also working with Maria to develop a program where formerly homeless veterans partner with police officers to do outreach in the community. We want to find veterans who are struggling before they end up in crisis situations." Sarah was impressed by the scope of Thomas's vision for helping other veterans. "It sounds like you've found your life's work." "I think I have," Thomas said.